I was thinking about that on the way in. It was like, man, this is wild.
Yeah.
You know, here I am, you know, trying to beat it up to KOPN, be there on time.
Right.
You know, and not many times did you have to cover for me, I think. Of course, oh, we can talk about this later.
Yeah, that's cool. Hi, everybody. I'm Elder Joseph Wilson for KOPN Radio. I've been here for 39 years and counting. I do the morning show on Saturday. It's called Serenade of Love, where they play the best in gospel music. And I also was happy to win the Radio Announcer of the Year for the Gospel Choice Music Awards for the 27th Annual Celebration 2021. So we put KOPN on the map and Columbia as well. And I'm so grateful to be a part of the KOPN family, ongoing. So we're so grateful to be here today. And I'm going to let my guest introduce himself. But the history of KOPN is most important. As you may see in the background, there's vinyl, there's CDs. We are sitting in the library at KOPN Studios, and I am a part of, I'd love to be a part of this history. So I got my good friend here that I've known for some time. So good to see him again, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Brother Joseph, it's good to see you too. Thank you for the introduction.
Absolutely.
And I congratulate you on that award. My gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's exciting, man.
Way to go, brother. My name's Butch Burrell. I was a listener of KOPN back in 1974, and I've been a listener of KOPN ever since.
Wow.
Up until about 30 minutes ago, until I came in here. And it's sort of been a soundtrack of my life. And I started out as a listener. I was pretty interesting. The way I got interested with KOPN was I was headed to California from Florida in 1974 to meet some folks in the Los Gatos Mountains, and they had a community going there. And my sister had moved here to Columbia about a year before that, and so on my journey I decided I would stop here for a couple of weeks.
Yes.
And visit with her and her new husband. And the second night that I was here in Columbia, I went into the bedroom where I was staying, and there was a radio on the bed post behind me on the bed shelf, and I turned it on. It was about midnight, and I turned that radio on, and I started searching for music that I wanted to hear.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, I come across KOPN, which I didn't know anything about KOPN, and there was harmonica music.
Harmonica.
Oh man, it was great, and I was like learning to play the harmonica at that time, and I'm like, wow, what is this? And so I listened, and then as it progressed and went on, and the guys doing the harmonica music stopped. There were two of them. I realized that one of them was in the studio, and the other was on the telephone, and I had never in my life heard anything like that. You know, I mean, it was like that's different. But anyway, other music came on. I don't remember what it was. But I woke up that next morning, Joseph, to the most beautiful music I ever heard in my life.
Wow.
I wasn't into classical music. I was into country music.
He's in the country music.
And rock and roll, of course. And I heard this music, and so it stuck with me. And so, make a long story short, I stayed for a while, and I started meeting people. And everybody I met, I would say, hey man, how about that radio station?
Right.
Which one's that?
Yeah.
KOPN. Oh. People have been living here all their life, didn't know KOPN.
Wow.
And so that happened for like a week, and I was thinking, my gosh, am I the only person that's listening to this radio station? I met somebody that actually knew about KOPN eventually, and I'm like, wow, well, you know, you're the only one I've talked to lately that knows anything about this little radio station.
Right.
He said, it's the hippie station. I said, oh man. He says, if you want to meet some good people, go out to Gladstone. It's south of Columbia. There's a bar out there. It's called the Hippie Bar. And I went out there and I started meeting people who knew about KOPN. Now let's jump 10 years later. As an avid listener, as a supporter, went to the KOPN parties, never really thought about being on the radio at all. Never thought about it, Brother Joseph. It was like that was something that was foreign to me, and something that I was afraid to even think about. Until one morning, a Saturday morning, and I was in my garden working, and of course my habit was that I had a speaker in my window of the house, and I'd listen to the music. And I was working, and the program director, or the announcer at that time, comes on, and he says, if anybody would like to do this Saturday morning show, give me a call. And it was like a spontaneous thing, man. I'm like,
jump right at it.
Do I want to do this? As I'm running up to the house.
Yeah.
And I call, the guy answers the phone, and I said, you said you need somebody to do this show, X, Y, and Z. And he's like, yeah, why don't you come up on Monday and talk to me, and we'll do an interview. And I'm like, okay. And so we did. And the interview lasted about 15 minutes.
About 15 minutes.
And he said, okay, you can do the show.
Okay.
And I'm like, what? I figured there was a whole line of people who would want to be on the radio. And here it was, 15 minutes up here, and this guy's telling me I'm going to have a show on Saturday mornings.
Wow.
The rest of us, well, history's still going, Brother Joseph.
Yeah, it is.
But I think the most interesting thing about it was that he was so tired of coming in on Saturday mornings. He had folks that were doing the show that weren't showing up. And so he was really anxious to have somebody do the show.
Wow. That is, you know, when we think about the KOPN history and the history of Columbia and what has been happening here, and even all the accolades, you know, to see so many people like yourself that started out, I like to say before my time, and because I got to ask you the name of your show and where did it come from, because we go back a ways where the people don't know, and I'm so grateful for you because I remember it just right off the top of my head. You know, coming up next is Cedar Creek Pickaway with the Tennessee Hound Dog. I love it. I used to love saying that right after my show.
And then it would be, don't you touch that dial.
I love it.
Oh, it was fun, wasn't it? You know how that happened?
How did that happen?
Sonny Rawls was the program director at the time. I don't know, did you ever meet Sonny? I doubt if you met Sonny.
I don't think I met Sonny.
And he left not too long after I did the show. But so we're sitting in the office up there, and he says, what do you know about bluegrass music? I said, yeah, I know a little bit about Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs and Bill Monroe, Osborne Brothers, I like them. He goes, there's more to it than that. I'm like, so he brought me in here, he brought me in the green room, I guess that's what you guys call it now, the other room next door, and said, well, here's the records, there's a listening room, you need to just go in there and listen to some stuff and see what, you know, get used to it. And I think the third cut that I put down on was the Tennessee Hound Dog by the Osborne Brothers.
Wow.
And before that song was over, the Tennessee Hound Dog, the Cedar Creek Pickaway, Miss Halfacre, everything that went on as far as the Cedar Creek Pickaway, it came from heaven.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, wow, this is what I'm going to do. And I told Sonny, he goes, what? He's like, what, you going to do what? And so anyway, that's how that all came about, that one song. I heard that one song, and I'm like, man, you know, this is where it's going to go. And that was kind of how the Tennessee Hound Dog got started.
I think that's amazing, because when you think about how all this programming evolved and where it came from, and the brains behind each one of them, you know, the stories are amazing, and yours like that. You know, sometimes if you can hear just a phrase in a song or even a melody, you know, it gives you an inspiration. So I think you really answered a lot of questions here this morning about the first time and who you met. Tennessee Hound Dog, I like saying that. Who would you say is the most famous person that you've met through KOPN in your tenure?
Joseph, are we talking about like on a national, international scale, or we're talking about our community?
Well, I think a little bit of both.
I was in a position where I got to meet a lot of folks. Just about every concert that we did. Of course, all the folks that we brought in, that was my exposure to people who, quote unquote celebrities. You know, Rhonda Vincent probably. Rhonda Vincent is a country singer now that's pretty popular and known all over the world. used to call me up and want me to play her music when she was like 13 years old, you know, and then when I was with a AM station, she would call me up almost constantly, you know, and then we got to know each other. Probably Rhonda Vincent. There's a lot, and I kind of hesitate trying to mention a lot of them, but there's Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal was standing right almost where you're sitting.
Is that right?
And we had a this place was full of children. Were you here for that?
Okay.
And he was up here and he did a children's show for us live on the air. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, you know, and that's one of the things about being at KOPN and community radio. That's really, really encouraging for the community to see that local people can get involved and they can have those connections, both nationally and internationally, because we got people listening everywhere.
No doubt.
You know, I'm thinking about how the station have changed over the years, because, you know, when we came in, I call it our time, because our shows were just right on the same day of each other. And, you know, what changes have you seen for good over the years for KOPN?
Now, are we talking about physical changes?
Yeah, physical changes or...
The stairs. It takes a lot longer to get up the stairs than it did 30 years ago, Joseph. I had to stop halfway.
Yeah.
But as far as the physical, the building and everything, the changes, I haven't been up here in over 30 years, and I feel like that I was here yesterday.
Wow.
Basically, the atmosphere is the same.
The atmosphere.
Now, when we first started, we didn't have the Ashlock room, of course, and so through the span of time and the staff that I worked with, from the mid '80s to early '90s, really did a good job as far as taking a room like this room was. It was full of junk, and if you come in that door, up front door, you couldn't see the back wall. I mean,
Okay.
And so that's not much of a change. And from what I can tell, you know, the air room and all looks about the same.
Well, it's good to know that the atmosphere is good, and it's still inviting. It's
No
still
doubt.
the family atmosphere, and you can still feel. Let's go ahead and put it in quotations. You can feel the love.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, when I walked in the front door this morning, it was like it was like going home. You know.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, man, I tell you, this is exciting to see you, the Tennessee Hound Dog, right there live in the flesh.
What's left of him anyway?
We had some great times, you know, when the shows would change and we would interact with each other. So I got to tell you, maybe asking you, because I've been trying to collect some KOPN memorabilia over the years. Do you remember maybe a favorite T-shirt that you had, or?
That's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dennis Murphy designed our T-shirts.
Oh, really?
The span of time that I was here.
Okay.
And just about every one of them was just, you know, it was amazing. Some of the stuff, yeah. There was one with a steamboat on it, which was great. My favorite was solid black with KOPN like in lightning in pink.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like a slash?
Yeah, it was just
No
like,
kidding.
you know, it's like KOPN in pink in a black shirt, and
All right.
I had that for a long time. But
hey, man, I'll put the wheel.
But
You can say, hey, bring back the black and pink, right? That'd be good.
But I do want to get back to Dennis, to the guy that designed them. I mean,
The designer, okay.
Yes, sir. He did great jobs.
Wonderful.
And
Wonderful.
he made them. Cornucopia was one too. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, all the cornucopia sound.
Well, I think that's one thing that maybe the community would love is maybe a little bit more memorabilia. I think it's a T-shirt, a hat, or a pin.
Yeah, but you wear the T-shirts out. That's
Yeah, you do. I mean, you get it unless you can stuff it and put it on the wall or something. Right?
Yeah.
Let's see. What skills did you learn or develop through your work here at KOPN as as an announcer?
Tolerance.
Tolerance.
I learned tolerance.
Okay. All right.
There's a lot of, when I came in KOPN, when I got to the door, I had to take my Butch hat off.
Yeah, take your Butch hat.
And put my KOPN hat on.
Okay.
And because, when you got so many different things going on, different cultures, different thoughts, and this and that, you had to foster a tolerance for some things, and that was one of the things. Now my radio skills and everything, I did AM radio, commercial radio after KOPN for several years, and of course it helped out there. Before KOPN, I was the quietest man in the room.
You was the quietest
person in the room.
No kidding.
It was it was a leap. And my friends and my family, especially my wife, is like, my God, what are you thinking about? You're going to go on the radio?
Right.
This and that.
You mentioned it earlier, and it just bring back memories in that intro for your show. And you would say, don't touch that dial.
Right.
Yeah, we might just have to bring that back.
Well,
I might have to use that.
You go right ahead. Speaking of tolerance, one of the things that I had to learn at KOPN when I first came here was to listen to people.
Okay.
And by listening to people, I became part of what they wanted to do at KOPN. I became a person who would listen to their problems. I would be a person who would try to rectify those problems and help them out with those problems. And sometimes I ran into impossible situations where I had to be tolerant.
Okay.
You may remember this. There was a programmer who, before your show, and it may have been before you were doing it, and you can tell me, and this guy was he just would not stop smoking marijuana in our air room.
In the air room.
And he was giving the folks coming in a hard time, and he just wouldn't stop. And so I took the show away from him. Yeah.
Okay.
And he showed up with a gun.
Oh my goodness.
And so I had to foster tolerance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
the police drug him down the stairway and put him in a squad car.
Is that right?
And all over losing his show. And so I had, various and sundry episodes like that. I had to suck it up.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this is what's going on. But what I meant by fostering tolerance is certain situations are going to come up where I don't agree with it. That's what I meant when I said I took my Butch hat off, put my KOPN hat on, and I came in and I dealt with, and I immersed myself in programmers in what they believed and what they wanted to put out over the air, and sometimes I didn't want them to do that.
Yeah.
Because it went against something inside me.
Wow.
So I had to foster tolerance.
Tolerance.
David Owens taught me tolerance.
Yes, he was a GM. I remember David Owens. Yes. Yep.
I love David Owens.
David was the fearless leader during our time. Yes, indeed.
I never see David a moment.
Yeah.
And I've seen him maybe 5 times in the last 30 years, and each time, I love you, David. He was, I love you too. We were partners.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, David Owens was a good dude, man.
Yeah.
I remember him, and we've seen a couple of GMs in our time, I suppose.
Well, this is all David Owens. This is all David Owens.
Okay. Well, this is I think one of the pride and joys of the history of KOPN is this library. We have a plethora of music, but what more so with this music is the vinyl, because a lot of the younger generation now don't really understand the vinyl episode, but you and I, looking back on it, we used to spin them over in the corner. It's like we looked for the albums, and they were the bloodline of our music.
Right, right.
Yeah, I'm always happy to hear and see vinyl because I hope it never goes away.
Right.
Yeah, that's part of the KOPN history as well. I know you can remember spinning a lot of them.
Let me back up 1 second.
Okay.
I just made the statement that David Owens, I'm talking about the physical. The span of time that I was here, Toby Cahill is responsible for a tremendous amount of the albums and the CDs that you see here.
Okay. Toby Cahill.
And was music director. And during the time that I was here.
Yes.
And she worked on acquisitions. I mean, that's all she did. And she is, the contacts that she made during that span of time was responsible for a tremendous amount of the music that's here right now.
Wow.
And
that's always good part to hear of the history of where the music comes from, because some people might wonder, you know, if we go out and purchase music, or they don't know how that inner workings of the history of the music of KOPN comes from. And now, of course, we have the internet and so many different ways, you know, streaming music, whatever, you know.
It's so different, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a whole lot different. But we know there's billions of songs out there for us. And the genre of music that you had on your show, that was did you ever get maybe a sense of the demographics of how far you reached, or how many people you might have reached during your time?
Well, Mitch Jane told me one time, sitting right here in this room, he says KOPN is a big fish in a little pond.
Big fish.
And and that's right.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I really didn't get much of a sense about where our signal was going as far as the Cedar Creek Pickaway and the Saturday morning programming.
Yeah.
I know we did a wedding one time in Lowman. There was a listener, and he and his fiancee were getting married, and he called me up and wanted to know, we're getting married on Saturday morning, can you play the music over the radio for our wedding? Really? And so we did. It was great, you know. Yeah, we played the music and everything and talked about the wedding, and wish I could remember the name, but yeah. As far as reaching out and everything, I never really worried about a tremendous amount of people listening to us, because I realized that there wasn't a tremendous, you know, community radio compared with commercial radio, there's no comparison. You know, I mean, there's no comparison whatsoever. You're not going to get the listeners. Speaking of fostering tolerance, KOPN listeners have to foster tolerance, because we change every 2 hours.
Yes, yes.
We're a changeling, you know, and so we're not, someone told me one time, you know, you're trying to be everything for everybody, you'll wind up nothing for anybody. But I didn't know. I'm like, no, you're not right. KOPN means a lot to individuals who dig it.
Yeah.
Just like that first morning I heard it, you know. I would say probably KOPN has a lot to do with me being here in Columbia, Missouri, because I met some fine folks through it. Of course, I met a little lady, and Joanne, you may remember my wife, Joanne, and Joanne passed away in 2014. But she, as far as the Cedar Creek Pickaway was concerned, she was the hidden ingredient, because she answered the phone. We had tremendous requests. I mean, it was just like wall to wall. And she answered the phone and pulled the records. And she took care of all that. And every once in a while she would appear on the radio as Miss Halfacre, and we'd do this little thing, you know. But as far as the listenership and everything, I just don't, I never even thought about trying to figure out how many are listening, you know. We sent out feelers and stuff like that about, you know, just like you guys have on the website now, you know, a questionnaire about when do you listen, how do you listen, what do you like, and all that stuff. Really didn't get a lot of feedback from it.
Well, you know, you said something I want to pivot back to was your wife, and we're so grateful that you shared that with us, and I thank you, and of course our condolences as well. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But you know, and I got to say this in her honor, if you don't mind. A lot of people don't realize that when the radio announcers are here, or programmers, they don't realize to give the accolades to the person's family that you don't see, because your wife was gracious enough to share you with the community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in her honor, I think, you know, a lot of people, we want to give them their props as well, because, you know, our wives and our husbands across the country, for radio announcers, especially here at KOPN, in a community setting, you know, they share you with the community. And a lot of people don't realize that. So we want to say thank you to her in her honor, and you for allowing her to come up. You said, and she helps you.
Thank you, Joseph.
Yes. And I think that's a good thing that we all should realize in community radio, because we do spend, our time was early in the morning. You know, we can't think about, a lot of folks don't want to get up out of bed to even go to work. we, you know, we come in and we get up early. Like our show starts, we have to be here early, like 5 o'clock or better, or after, to set up and get ready for the 6 o'clock spot. So, or after that. So I'm grateful for that, for all of our programmers down through the years, where their family members have shared them with the community. And I think we should be grateful for that. Yes,
Thank you.
Can you remember a favorite station event that you might have hosted? Or did you ever host something?
Yeah.
One of the outside ones, something that you did?
Yeah. Brother Joseph, I got to tell you that I can't name just one. I mean, they were all great. I mentioned earlier the Taj Mahal.
Taj Mahal.
Having Taj Mahal up here in this room and playing for children was just wonderful.
Yeah.
When we first did the Ashlock room, the way all that came about, and if you guys have talked to David, he maybe he had mentioned it, is David found out that the Ashlock room, actually this room we're in right now, was a fiddle shop.
Fiddles.
By Haight Ashlock. And David found that out. And it was like, I came in one morning and David's tearing walls out. And I'm like, David, what's happening, man? He goes, Ashlock room. I'm like, what? He says, the Ashlock room. This is going to be the Ashlock room. And that's where it all started.
Wow.
And yeah. And so anyway, events. Radio Ranger.
Radio Ranger.
At the county fair.
Okay.
Him and Sam Griffin would go down to the county fair and host that, and it was great. I mean, it was, you know, they would take care of. Once we shot I say we, Kevin Walsh and some of the others, we shot our audience up into space. They had a rocket, and they put a microphone on the rocket, and I kind of Space Odyssey, we had that going on the radio, and we built it up and everything. The first time we built it up, and all of a sudden we hear, then I hear people screaming, and then I hear, bam, and it went into I think I was told it went into a cooler. It went into the audience. There were some people wherever they were. Wow. And so that was the first time. Second time it worked, and you could hear. And I'm not even sure if they ever found the microphone, but that was pretty cool, I thought.
That's pretty cool.
My gosh, get me started on stuff.
It's good that you can remember those special events, and I think that's one of the things that highlight community radio that our listeners would appreciate.
Well, there are more.
Oh, yeah.
The MRTW was very, very special. I wasn't involved in MRTW because I had all my task here and everything, but the Midwest Radio Workshop Theater would come here once a year. My son was 12 years old, and he interviewed Randy Tom. Randy Tom, who was, I guess, the sound guy with Star Wars, you know, and he was here for MRTW. Richard Fish was the guy that would come in with the MRTW and come on our airways, and he was a great talent. But MRTW was really important to KOPN. Steve D'Onofrio and those folks that worked on it just did a wonderful job.
That's great.
Yeah, and that's, gosh, everything that took place up here and went over there. Jerome Wheeler Day.
Jerome?
We did a Jerome Wheeler Day here, and we had an audience in here, and Jerome sang his songs, and we had an hour tape thing that I did of interviews of his friends around town, and that was pretty special to me.
Yeah. You know, when you think about it, it's really important how we can recall some of the forming history of KOPN. I love it because as you begin to talk and share, the history just comes out of you, and I'm all smiles under this mask because you have done a fantastic job, and I always remembered you, and you know, because our shows are right next to each other, and on the program grid, and after you do it for so long, it just embedded in your mind, you know. And I always remember the Tennessee Hound Dog and the Cedar Creek Pickaway. It was just the best, and it's great to see you and to hear the history of KOPN coming out through you. And I like the way you can recall the names of certain events and people, because that was important in the forming of the whole thing. And I think it's a great opportunity for people to hear and know about some of the history of KOPN through you.
Yeah. Well, the people were very special.
Yes.
The staff.
Yes.
And of course the volunteers, but the staff I worked with was, I could have never done anything without them. And we worked together, and we were all into community radio. Mm-hmm. We were all into community-oriented radio. And at that time, Susan Newstead was general manager for most of the time that I was here. Okay. Diane Hunnicky, I think, did some temporary managing, and there were some others. David Carnes was our engineer, okay. And David Owens was David Owens. You know? Yes, I was the program director, yeah. And but David was like volunteer coordinator, and mm-hmm. We did training and mm-hmm. stuff like that. And Inya Gracechild was our secretary at that time. Mm-hmm. Toby Cahill was our music director. If I could name any people now, let's see. Yeah, but we had a great staff. We had a paid staff then. Mm-hmm. And I don't know for sure, and some of the other folks who were here before me could tell you, but I think that we had the biggest staff, paid staff that KOPN had up to that time. I don't know about the last 30 years, but up to that time, we had a good paid staff. Subscriptions were up. Wow. We had began writing grants, which KOPN wasn't doing before, mm-hmm. and getting money in. Mm-hmm. Bingo! Bingo. You remember bingo? Yeah. A lot of folks who were volunteers at KOPN didn't even know we had bingo when we had it. Wow. Because we couldn't advertise it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, you know, we were legal with the state. Of course. We couldn't advertise it. And the thing is that the people who showed up to play the bingo game weren't even KOPN listeners. They were not listening? Mm-mm. Wow. And so it was something that was out there that was making money that nobody mm-hmm. really knew about and didn't hardly even talk about, except mm-hmm. those ones that had to go over there and do it, Sam Griffin and Susan Newstead and some of the other folks took care of that. But bingo helped us out a lot. You know, that brings me to a pivot to talk about, or have you talk about just something, and I don't know if it would really be uncomfortable or not, but maybe a time when you didn't think something was going to work, but it did. Anything like that you could remember? Oh, Lord, yes. Oh, yeah. Life. Oh, life's working out pretty good, though. Yeah. Well, yes, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the workings of community radio. But mm-hmm. we found out that we could do concerts. We were doing stuff with the Blue Note, and we would advertise for the Blue Note, and then we'd get a little bit of money off the thing. You know, of course, mm-hmm. Richard was bringing everybody in when we weren't. Now, KOPN did some concerts before I was involved, mm-hmm. but we seen where we could make some money just doing them on our own. Cool. And we did several. We did some great concerts. We did some great concerts, yes. I thought. One in particular mm-hmm. was, there's a band called the Dillards. Mm-hmm. And the Dillards were on the Andy Griffith Show. They were the Darling Boys. I don't know if you ever watched the Andy Griffith Show, but they were the Darling Boys up in the mountains that played the fiddle and the banjo, and you know. And so we had a Rodney Diller album here, and I was playing music off of it. Mm-hmm. And I knew about the Dillards, you know, and I heard about the Dillards, but didn't know that too much about them. But at that point in time, I was dealing with Keith Case out of Nashville, who was representing most of the artists that are brought in. And one morning, I'm sitting in the office in there, and I'm looking through his brochure, and you know, Rodney Dillard. He covered Rodney Dillard, so I called him up. And these guys hadn't played together for over 20 years. And so I called him up and called Keith up and said, is there any way you think we can get the Dillards back together? And it was kind of silent for a second. He said, what? I said, is there any way we could like maybe do a Dillards concert and get the Dillards back together? He goes, Butch, they hate each other.
They hate
He said, they haven't played together in over 20 years.
Really?
And I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know,
oops.
you know. I'm like, okay. And he laughed, you know. He's like, man, yeah, I'd never get those guys together.
Wow.
And so we talked a little bit about something else. And then at the end of the conversation, he says, when I talk to Rodney again, I'll ask him about that. I'm like, okay. It was about 2 weeks later I got a phone call. Well, during that 2 weeks, it's like, okay, we can't do this. These guys hate each other. You know, let's do something else. And so I basically just put it on the shelf. You know, I was like, yeah. Then I get a call from him. He's like, I talked to Rodney, and he's going to talk to everybody else, and I think maybe these guys might do this. And I said, are you kidding? He goes, no. He said, now how are you going to do this? I said, well, we got a hall and everything. And so I give him a, you know, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And so then he called me back about 3 days later. He says, I don't believe it. They're going to do it. And I'm like, wow. Wow. Cool. That's going to be great, man, you know. It was about a week later. I'm in the air room, and Jan, I think was her name, was our secretary at that time. She says, there is a Mitchell F. Jane on the phone for you. And I said, Mitchell F. Jane, okay. And so I picked it up. I said, hello. He says, this is Mitch Jane. And I said, yes, sir. With the Dillards. I said, oh, Mitch. He goes, who the hell wants to hear us? I'm like, well, everybody wants to hear you, Mitch. He says, I'm deaf as a snake. He said, who's going to hear us? And I'm like, right. So anyway, you talk with him. We did the show, Joseph. We filled the hall. Yes. It was the comic book club. It's the Blue Note now. Okay. But it was the comic book club then. We rented that out. We filled the hall. They came. It was pretty wild. They came and they did their show, the songs that they could remember. And then people were dancing in the aisles and in front of the stage. And oh wow. And Rodney, they get to the end of their set. And Rodney is like, Rodney Dillard, he approaches the audience and he says, well, that's all the songs that we can play right now. You want us to do them again? Yes. And they did it again. Encore. You know, and I mean, it was great. And people just loved it. Wow. And the next morning, Keith Case calls me. How'd it go? It went great, man. It went great. You know, and I told him everything I just told you. Yeah, yeah. And he's like, wow, oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Man, I'm glad to hear that. From that concert, the Dillards, well, they went to New York after that. Wow. And then they did a complete national tour all over this country. They went to France. Yeah. They went to England, I think. They went to Japan. Wow. They made records. They're now, I think, it's about 5 years ago now. It had to be longer because Mitch was alive. Anyway, inducted into the Bluegrass Hall of Fame. Wow. They'd have never done it. If they'd have never done that had not KOPN brought them up here. Now, the story doesn't end there, Joseph. It doesn't end? No. That's good. Mitch Jane lived in Columbia at one time as a young man, worked at the theater, and moved back here. And Mitch moved back here and lived over on the west side of town and was up here pretty frequently and did radio. Him and his wife did radio for us for over a year. Wow. Here at KOPN, they did a bluegrass show. Man, there's some rich history here. I love this because I knew you were. I'm going to affectionately call you the one of the KOPN Britannicas. No, I like that because you have
a wealth of knowledge and history that I think a lot of people embrace. And you know, as you were talking, I got to thought about maybe one question would be the artists that you have been able to talk to. I think our listening audience, they really get a kick out of hearing the programmers or hosts talk to the artists that they hear playing the music.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you've talked to any favorite artists besides the one you just mentioned, of course, but any others? I'm pretty sure you have some, and that's probably a dumb question. But some talking to the artists and having a conversation with them on air, that is like, I think it's the best for the community.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Oh, there's so many of them, Joseph.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many of them.
There's a lot.
Gatemouth Brown.
Yeah.
I got to hang out with Gatemouth Brown, Clarence Gatemouth Brown. Got stoned with him. You know, it was. They probably won't cut that part out.
That's a sidebar.
and Doc Watson.
Doc Watson.
Doc Watson was one of the best concerts that I ever did. I was ever involved with. And it wasn't just me; it was everybody. But that was a great one.
That's fantastic.
The group that we made the most money off of was the Five Blind Boys of Alabama.
Man.
Were you at that concert?
You know what? I went to one and met them at one of the Roots and Blues, and I was able to announce on stage, and I was actually able to introduce them.
Oh,
that
wow.
was definitely the Blind Boys. Yes, man.
They were at the Second Baptist Church.
Yes.
And so I went down there for the sound check and all that, and they weren't there, but they finally got there, and they had the band was setting up and everything. And there's some rooms at the Second Baptist Church down below, and various rooms, and the boys were in there. And so I went in and introduced myself, and we're all talking, and they're cutting up and talking about stuff. And one of them says, "Man, I got to go to the bathroom." And where's the bathroom? And I was the only guy with sight in that room, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "It's down the hall." He said, "Take me down there." And so he stood up, and he took and put his hand on my belt. And then I started walking, and I get in the hall, and I turn around and look, and all five of them were holding on, and it was like a train. Oh, it was cool, man. It was like, wow. And so then I got, each one of them went to the bathroom, and
Yes.
But we made more money off that concert than any.
Wow.
And
I know, probably like me, you may share the same sentiment because we're talking about history here. One of the things I do regret is that not being able to take a photo with some of the artists that we've met down through the years, that may be gone now, or because I had a bishop from at a convention one time tell us at a radio convention. He said, "Don't ever miss a photo opportunity.
Yeah.
Even if you feel stupid, just do it.
Take that picture.
Take that picture because you never know." And
freeze that time.
Freeze that time. 'Cause, I mean, having a picture with the Blind Boys of Alabama was classic. That would have been classic, and others. I know you probably had some pictures as well.
Yeah.
And I just think that's important for us to get out in the community, man. And you just bring back so many memories. Just thinking about the artists and the music that we play is such a vital part of the history here.
Yeah.
And your show, it was because you used to tell me coming in, it's like, "Man, you had a good show, man. That's some good music, And I would hang around and listen to your show as well, and I always loved the intro. The intro is what stuck with me for years. That's what I got. That's what I got into me. If somebody asked me on the street, "Hey, you know anything about the Tennessee Hound Dog?" I said, "Yeah, I know him."
But you know what? Talking about the celebrities and the people that you meet and all that and everything, I was more into local.
The locals?
Local people. I mean, there's the local musicians and songwriters around here that are better or as well as anywhere in the country. Bob Dyer. Bob Dyer's music is deep.
It's deep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Jerome Wheeler was a wonderful songwriter. Bob Runyon. Bob Runyon, who Bob and I talk on the phone about twice a week. We're still big buddies. We go to Winfield. There's a music festival in Kansas that we go to every year, and Bob Runyon is an 8-time national songwriting champion.
Really?
8 times.
8 times.
8 times. A lot of people don't realize that. Bob Runyon is a wonderful songwriter, and the Grace family. You know,
man,
there are just so many. I'd have to look at a list. But Kathy and Dave, oh my gosh, you know, just screaming of talent around here. There was a young man when I first became program director that was doing a little rock and roll show on Saturdays for an hour, and so I hung out to see him, and I don't remember the time frame now, but he had a show, and it was he called himself Derek Bebop Dickerson, and now he's Deke Dickerson, and he's known nationally as a blues singer. And he started right here at KOPN. Wow. And I watched him come up those steps one morning or one day, and he had his records with him, and they were 45s, and maybe half of them had sleeves. You know, wow. And it was like, I'm like, oh man, you gonna play those? He goes, yeah. And that's what he did. Played those 45s, scratching and popping. But
well, you know, that's some of the good history of radio announcers that you have. We have the history of vinyl. When we didn't know anything about CDs and that kind of music, you know, but we would bring in the records or have our own records, and we would spin those records the duration of our time on the air, which was great. And I like that you mentioned the local component, because I think that's another part of the essence of community radio, is that piece where we can find the jewels in our community and give them that audience, you know.
Absolutely.
A lot of people, there's a lot of talent here around Columbia and in Columbia.
Right.
And your show, mine, and others, of course, we're able to hear about those artists, and I like to call them up and coming. And I'm sure you have played some on your radio.
Oh,
the
absolutely.
local guys and the local girls and groups that form around here. You know, there is some good talent in mid-Missouri.
No doubt.
No doubt.
Let's talk about KOPN.
Yes, sir.
All right, community radio. One of the things about KOPN and it being called community radio is one word's missing, and that's oriented.
Oriented.
KOPN was placed in this community, oriented in this community to serve this community. And so, like a lot of program directors and other folks that have been in management at KOPN, I think probably I went a little overboard with that. Not that that's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. And I'd like to tell you about a little story about how KOPN is seen in the community radio world. Lincoln, Nebraska, we had, of course, we're members of the NFCB, and I assume we still are. You know, they have seminars every year, and we went to Boulder, Colorado, Washington, D.C., various and sundry places, but they had one in Lincoln, Nebraska. And so several of us went up for that. And if I remember correctly, myself and Christine, Susan, David, Kay Benetti, Kevin Thomas, Jerome, and a man, Mr. Grasnick. Jerome had won a NFCB had a song that about Columbia sewage system or something. I forget the song, and he won the NFCB award for that song. So he went up there for that. The reason he was there. Everybody else was KOPN. And we got there, and that evening, I was told, "You do know that you're on the panel for the national programming meeting." And I'm like, "No, I didn't know that." So I wound up on a panel of 3 people and myself and the moderator. and the subject was national programming on community radio. And at that point in time, that was a big deal because, you know, even though we had some space that we used, we had some tape space at that point in time that we used, and that was put together in a studio besides ours, someplace else. Cypress Avenue was a good one. Cypress Avenue was a rock and roll show that was, the station in Kansas City sent it to us once a week and produced in their studios. And it was, everybody loved it. I mean, it was great, Cypress Avenue. So my point is we didn't have a lot of national programming going on. And the stuff that we did have, we actually used them as fillers so we could train or do something else, you know. And I'm sure that still happens now. But my point is that I was on this panel of national programmers, and the people that were on the program, on the panel with me were pro-national programming on community radio. And what that meant was they're going to produce shows in California, New York, or wherever. They're going to send them to us. We're going to probably pay for them in a way, but they're going to send them to us, and we air them on our airwaves. That's basically the gist of it. I wasn't into that. And so I wound up on this panel. So the three people that went ahead of me were really pushing national programming, and you know, it was, and they were right, man. You know, slick up your sound, you get sound going, you got people, you got information that people want to hear, all those, and everything was like, yeah, you know, that really sounds good, but not on my radio, our radio station, you know. And so anyway, they did a good spiel, and the audience was attentive, and then it came to me. I'm like, oh boy. Well, what I did that morning is I stopped at our table. We had a table there in the hotel, and I got a program guide. And I had the program guide with me, and I started, I never even recognized these guys and said, hey, well, they said this and da-da-da, but here's how I feel. I just started talking. I said, community radio serves a large area. And within that area, listening area, we have these little satellites that are floating around in our community. And they deal with issues of our community. The people who bring them to our community produce them right here. They're from our community. And if you're going to be a community-oriented radio station, then that's who you serve. That's the way I got this job. That's the way I got the job of program director. When I was interviewed for program director, what I told them was, I'm going to make sure that KOPN is community-oriented. And it had been, and it still was at that time, but I was going to keep it that way and even more, and that's what we did. And so anyway, I picked up the program guide, and I started at midnight on Monday, and I went through that program guide all the way back around, and every show I talked about, every show. Every show. Took me about 45 minutes. Wow. You know, I'm pretty long-winded. So, and what I did with the music shows was I let them know, well, this is a person who, this person is a folk musician professional, and he does a folk show. He's from our community. He generates listeners from our community, blah, blah, blah. And went all through that. But the shows that really meant something, as far as pertaining to community radio and our involvement in the community, were shows like we did a poetry show. Poets from the area. Kay Benetti did it. And it was, everything was produced right here. We had poets that came up and talked about poetry in our community. Wow. We had programming for children. Ann Mayer on Wednesdays, the Jewel Box. Children would come up from schools and actually be on the radio and get a little tour. And so we were very active as far as the children in our community. And we had a show called Freewheeling. Freewheeling was a show that was all about the disabled. You know, your rights, what the issues that are going on in Washington, the issues that are going on in your community, where you can find a nice ball bearing for your wheelchair. I mean, it was dedicated to the disabled in our community. farm issues.
Mm.
Robert Brown, Linda Leno did a farm show, and Robert being a farmer, and they had farmers up here, and they taped farmers off out in the field somewhere, and they did farming issues all the way nationally and for our community.
Wow.
That was and they got some grants from that show, I think, also.
Yes, indeed.
The Zebra Sunrise,
Zebra
which is mentioned. The Zebra Sunrise was prison issues.
Mm-hmm.
And actually we would collect calls from the prison. We actually were talking to the prisoners. We would have a mother call up and talk to her son. Mm-hmm. You know, it don't get much better than that.
No, you know,
and that's community.
I gotta
and that's a satellite in our community.
Yes.
You know,
because right before, as you know, you may have had someone call into your show, but we did have an 800 number. I remember,
mm-hmm.
Because they used to call my show from
Mobley, probably
from prison. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
and they would say, "Hey," because you could hear they do a little recording, of course,
mm-hmm.
and let you know that was one of the part of the history of KOPN. That's fantastic.
Right.
Yes, sir.
We had a dream interpreter who, for a couple of years,
yes.
would live have people call up and tell their dreams, and she was a professional dream interpreter, and that's something you don't see on regular radio.
That's right.
One of my favorites is we had some journalism students from Taiwan,
mm-hmm.
and they wanted to do a show where they could read news from their country in their language to the group here within our community.
Mm-hmm.
So another little satellite floating around,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know, a different culture, a different type of music, a different way of talking. I got a lot of flack for that one. 2 hours of foreign language, but right now, what do we have going right now, I think?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I mean, right now we're broadcasting in Spanish, right?
Yes.
I love it. But back then I got a lot of flack for it, let me tell you. But it was fulfilling a need,
mm-hmm.
and what they did is they were reading the news from their country to their people here.
Wow.
And
that's serving the community.
Yeah.
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 There's a lot of people here from different places. Yeah.
The black community.
Mm-hmm.
The shows on Saturday,
mm-hmm.
man, you know, people from the community, Wanafay, and people from the community knowing what's going on in this community, mm-hmm. talking about it on the radio, man.
Yes, sir.
You know.
Yes, sir.
And so what were we doing? There's that satellite within our
mm-hmm.
realm that we were fulfilling and giving them access
yes.
to radio.
Yes.
Which they wouldn't get anywhere else.
I got to mention that. I was going to see if there was a spot for it, but I'm pretty sure she may have called into your show. But one of the highlights of history for me as well is to have the councilwoman, the late councilwoman, Almeda Creighton.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she called my show a lot on Saturday, and I know she called you as
very
well.
Lovely person.
Yes, and you know, they were doing the straight talk, and she was like, "I'd never forget it, man." And it's funny that you should mention that, because she would call and say, "Baby, this is Almeda." She said, "I'm here at dialysis, but I got to tell you what's going on." I'm listening to your show. You're sounding good, man.
Bless her heart.
Yeah, and she would, you know, she was instrumental, and it's still going on. The family is still carrying it on. Everybody eats during the Thanksgiving time.
Mm-hmm.
So serving the community again, exactly. And I have that as a part of our history on Saturday morning, because I know she would call in, and I'm sure she called you as well. So
yeah.
Yes, sir. Great memories. Great history.
No doubt. We have a man from Zimbabwe who does motherland jam, African music.
Oh yeah.
It couldn't get much better than that. You got people that are steeped in this music,
yes.
and into his community.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then of course the reggae. You know, and so anyway, I'm going over some of the things that I told these folks in this meeting, and as I went through the program guide. And I don't want to leave too many out here. The Grateful Dead show, you know, with Reverend John. I don't know if anybody remembers Reverend John that did it. Reverend John was into the Grateful Dead, man. He had all kind of bootleg tapes, and he did a great show, and it was on at midnight. And
Those guys would be here when I came in.
Mm-hmm.
I think because they would do like from 1 to 6, right?
Right.
1 to 6 a.m.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And my point is that it was, once again, there's that satellite that's floating around in our community of quote unquote deadheads that don't want to listen to any other music. And where'd they get it?
Wow.
Right here. It's right there in our program guide. One of the things that was really neat about women's programming was the Crystal Set Feminists. I don't know if they're still active, but they were like a group within KOPN, and I completely, it's your baby. And they did the most wonderful women's programming and kept it going. It was a group of ladies.
Yeah.
You know, we had Gaydar, Victor Esteves. He about gay men, for gay men in the community. All the issues.
All these.
You know,
That was
what were we doing, Brother Joseph? There's that little satellite that's floating around, and we're saying, here we are. Here's where you have access. You're not going to get it anywhere else.
Yes.
Let's do it at KOPN.
Yes.
And locally produced news. Cal Greenspan did news for a long time. Davidka became our news director, and it was I think 12 o'clock she would go on and do local news, fulfilling that aspect of what's needed, what you need to know, what's going on in your community. And she also, I think, covered the city council, but not live. She would, you know, talk about it and what was going on with city council. Dave Mars did a show about the efficiency of solar energy. He was the city's man when it come to that subject, and he did a show up here, and he talked about and encouraged people to use insulation back in that time and different things. Talked about solar energy 30-something years ago. You know, talked about solar energy and this and that. That was a great show. David Mars just did a great show, and there's others. But my point is that I went through this program guide, and I pointed out all these things, and it took me a while. And so when I got through with it, what I said was, my point of all this is also my question. In a community-oriented radio atmosphere, where is there room for national programming? I've got people waiting in line to be on the radio locally from our community, talking about something that's going to benefit our community. It's going to help our community in various and sundry ways. Tell me, where is there room for national programming on a community-oriented radio station?
Wow.
It was silent. There must have been 50 people in there. It was silent. And they just stared at me. Well, I thought was, oh, I've gone over. You know, I mean, they're ready to get out of here. You know, am I the only one that sees this? That was what I was thinking. The moderator said something, I forget, that 3 people that were promoting national programming were kind of squirming in their chair. They didn't say anything. And so she dismissed us.
Well, you know,
I walked out into the hall, Brother Joseph,
Yeah.
thinking, I think maybe I just made some people mad. Program director from, I think, the community station in San Francisco. A young lady came up to me in the hall. She had tears in her eyes, man. And she said, that is the best description of what a community radio station should be that I have ever heard.
Wow.
That's what I said.
That's what you said.
I'm like, wow, well, thank you.
Yes.
The rest of that day, that evening, and the next day, either at our table, in the hall in the hotel, at a restaurant, people would come up to me and say, hey man, you guys are doing it. You know, you guys are doing it. People would come and get from our table and get our program guide. We're talking about community radio people, you know, who are doing the same thing we're doing.
That's why I think of the longevity of KOPN, and I really appreciate being a part of the KOPN history. Dorothy corrected me on the radio, and I always give props to her. She was the one that started the program, and I came on with her and was her co-host until she got married and moved away.
Mm-hmm.
And then it fell into my lap, of course. And you know, the history, I like to, because as you were going down through there is so much. I like to call it verbal tradition that we miss. And I think that's part of what's bringing it to the community is, even with this history-making event for KOPN, to hear of some of the history and the richness of what's been in Columbia and what's still to come. You know, for people like yourself who are pioneers for other folks coming in.
Yeah.
You know, I'm grateful to be able to know you. And to see you still kicking like me. You know?
I'm trying to anyway.
I know, right?
Not quite as high. I can still run as fast as I could when I was 18 years old, but only for about 3 feet.
Right. Well, I can go along with that. I had a guy tell me, an older guy, he said, well, I'm doing pretty good. He said, I'm flopping, but I can't fly. So that's a great thing.
Oh, man.
But hey, man, this has been great. I don't know exactly where they want to cut off here, but
The only thing I want to ask is the closing question I always ask, which is there anything you want to talk about? Any question you want to answer we haven't asked?
Yeah.
Can we, before we answer that, let me switch out battery real quick on this one.
Because you might have come up here with the vision, like, oh, I'm going to talk about A, B, and C, and they've only asked me about X, Y, and Z. While he's switching out the card, I want to share my Butch Burrell favorite story. And it's a small one, but I was probably 19 years old, maybe 20. And I came to the University of Missouri, and I wanted to be a journalism major. And I went there, and I started getting involved in the man-eater, the student paper.
Yeah.
And every other student I met was cutthroat, and nobody was nice. People were like stepping over you, you know,
really?
stabbing you in the back and stepping. I just felt like there was no collaboration. Everybody was kind of, but these were undergraduates trying to get into J school and make a name for themselves. Well, I had been a kid. I had been my parents got divorced, and my dad stayed in Columbia. And I would visit him, and my dad were walking down Broadway one day, and there was the canopy over the sidewalk, and there was a sign hanging there. It said KOPN. It's probably like 1979, and I've talked about this in pledge drives. I said to my dad, "What's KOPN?" He said, "That's a radio station that was started by hippies."
Did he?
That's my dad said in like 1979. So 1989, I get here as a freshman, and probably sometime in the second semester, I found my way up to KOPN because I remembered. Oh yeah, my dad and I talked about that years ago. So I come up here, and I signed up to be a volunteer, and Butch was, I guess, program director then. And he said, "We're going to get you trained on the board." All right, so we go in the air room. I'm terrified because to me, radio is this like monolithic other thing. It's like I can't do the radio.
Yeah.
Butch puts me in the air room, and he puts everything on cue. Give me a record. Tape maybe, and the mic, and he showed me what was each strip. He said, "You go and practice for a while," and he left the room, and he put everything on, but it was all on cue. I remember being terrified, like I'm gonna mess this station up. But the confidence that gave me was like, no, this guy who doesn't really know me believes in me enough that I'm not gonna break it. I'm not gonna mess it up. But just that power in that moment, it was like, no, this is your radio station. You may not be a member yet. I am now, a proud member, many years going.
Right.
That was just an incredible moment for me. And I remember you also talking one time about music disappearing from the library. Because I think as much stuff is here, that much stuff has walked away.
Yeah.
You know, there's no barcodes on it. I mean, no theft prevention or whatever.
Yeah.
I know the stuff in the jazz library that we had a couple years ago is gone.
Right.
But I remember Butch talking about, well, you're in charge of the station when you're up here, because I'd come up here and I'd do jazz at night, and I'd do morning air early on, Southern.
Oh, you did morning air?
Classical, yeah.
Okay.
When I want to get on the air, you know, when you first want to get on the air, they're like, well, you can do midnight to 3 or 5 to 7 a.m. or whatever, so I did that. Butch said, you got to watch out for people that will come up here. Because, you know, there may be somebody, you hear them from the alley saying, hey.
And also, Butch, what were some of the staff roles here and that time frame?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Well, I did the Cedar Creek Pickway for about a year, and Sonny left, And so they did without a program director for a while.
Oh, okay.
And then they opened up the job for program director, and I really didn't even think about it, but I had 2 or 3 folks who approached me and said, we think maybe, you should apply for the job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did, and I got the job. But Susan very thoughtfully said, I'm not going to make you a program director immediately. I want you to be like an assistant. And that's basically, I don't even know what title I had, but I was here and I was learning. And I was like, arm around David. I mean, David was my post that I leaned on,
Yes.
Yes. And
So
then after a period of time, and then I became program director. And I was program director until about, I think, 91. Mm-hmm. But I worked here some more. I did Cedar Creek Pickaway on Saturdays and was working at another radio station and for a while. And then we had a change of management, and Cedar Creek Pickaway was gone from here. And so I approached the manager here, Brian, I think was his name, and said, are you going to do the Cedar Creek Pickaway anymore? And he goes, no. And I'm like, okay, I'm taking it with me. And he goes, go ahead, I don't care. And I'm like, all right. And so I took it to another station.
Oh, okay.
All right. So as far as management, that's as far as I got. And right now I'm back to where I started. I'm a listener. And I think that's just as important as being general manager, program director, or whatever. To me, the listener is the one that I was really, really into satisfying. And like we talked about before, you got, this word tolerance comes in. If you're going to be a listener of KOPN, you got to tolerate hearing your music, and then next time hearing something that you're not into.
Right.
And but that's as far as management. That's as far as I got.
Wow. Well, this has definitely been an eye opener, and I'm glad to be a part of the history and see you and reminisce and see what's happening, and the life of radio is going to continue. And I often heard
that's the
people
good
say,
part.
Yes,
That's the good part.
yes, sir.
It's still going.
It's still going. It's still going. And
It's still
I
going.
always tell people in the community, I say, well, I started at KOPN. That's my home. It always will be.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Some of the things I think KOPN could improve on now is from just being the listener, is training. I think folks, especially late at night, there's folks that need some training. And training was something that I really focused on. And I'll tell you the reason I did. Not a bad reflection on anybody. It was just KOPN, when I was with KOPN for those years, KOPN was a teenager. Wild and rebellious,
Right.
leaning to the left. We had a show on called Liberty Lobby or something one time that was pretty conservative, but I've got rid of that. But KOPN's always been kind of loose. It's just the nature of the beast. When you got so many people involved. When you come to a station meeting and there's a subject and you want to decide tonight what to do about this, and you come in and folks are here in this Ashlock room. There's chairs all the way around it. It's full. Person sitting in this chair is a person who does a show called Spectrum of Jewish Music, and there's no other, and Jewish culture, and very steeped in it, and there's no other alternative, nowhere to get his message out but KOPN. But he's sitting here, he or she. The person sitting next to him is a punk rocker. The person sitting next to that person is a Grateful Dead, as we mentioned. There's no other music.
Sure.
Person sitting next to that person loves classical music and thinks jazz sucks. The next person sitting to that person has the same attitude about something else.
Right.
The person sitting next to that person is thinking, I don't care about this. Why am I even here?
Okay.
And all these people have come together to agree.
Right. Wow.
Oh man, it's almost like Congress. And so, but the one thing that I think KOPN should agree on right now, And I don't know if you guys have programming committees or what, but you need training.
Training.
You need training. There are some people that are doing shows here that are perfectly great. I mean, entertaining. I heard a show last night. I'm not going to mention it, but I heard a show last night where the operator absolutely did not know what they were doing.
Okay.
I heard a show here where a remote was being done somewhere else, and when they come back, it was dead air. Then all of a sudden you hear some music, then the music died down, and then it's dead air. And then you hear music, and then you hear a cart, and then it's dead air. I knew exactly what was going wrong. It was on audition.
Right.
The board was on audition, you know. And I wanted to call the person and say, hey man, your board's on audition.
What's going on?
You know, and about 20 minutes later, finally, the person started talking. And it wasn't their fault, but they just need a little more training. And
You know,
and here's why I say that.
Yes.
When I was talking about this earlier. I don't think I got this far. After I talked with Sonny, and within 15 minutes found out I had a darn radio show, which I didn't expect really. I called my friend Paul Foch of Paul and Grace, the Win Grace, the Grace family fame. And I told him, I'm going to be doing radio on Saturday. And he goes, wow, man. I said, can I come up on your show on Tuesday? His show was on Tuesday. Can I come up on your show and kind of show me what to do? He goes, oh, yeah, sure, come on. And so I came up, and I spent maybe an hour and a half with him. And he showed me how to cue records. I didn't know how to cue a record. He showed me how to cue the record. He showed me basically cue records, the mic, and that was basically it. And he let me talk a little bit. And we talked about the Cedar Creek Pickaway coming up. And so I was coming. Sonny said, come in on Saturday, and I'll sit with you, and I'll show you the ropes and blah blah blah. And so I showed up on Saturday morning, and we go in there, and I don't even remember the people before me. I don't even remember that. I just remember us going in, and I got the records, and we got all set and everything, and we got the show going. And Sonny left, and I did 2 or 3 transfers, you know, this record, that record, went on the mic, said KOPN, 89.5 FM, powered it back down, got the music going, you know. About 20 minutes, and I'm starting to wonder, where they gotta go? And then in a few minutes, Sonny opens the door, and he says, you're doing a good job. I said, thanks. He goes, see you later. I'm like, what? Out the door he went.
Had to wing it.
Within the first 2 hours, I made every mistake a board operator could ever make.
Wow.
Left my mic on, miscued, and I was like petrified. And within that 2 hours, I had decided this is not for me. This is not for me. This is 5 minutes after he left, the phone started.
Right.
You know. Can I hear so and so? Yeah, I wrote it down. Hey, where's the other guys that do the program? Well, they're not here. I'll be doing the program from now on. What? Request, and it was like, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into?
Wow. Yeah.
About 2 hours into it, the phone rang and I answered it, and it was Paul Foch. He said, Butch, you're doing a great job, man. He said, I knew you could do it. He said, you sound good. Don't worry about the mistakes. You're doing a good job. Just want to let you know that. And I hung up the phone, and I thought, okay. If Paul thinks I'm doing a good job, because I was embarrassed. I was afraid of what people were thinking, you know, all these mistakes I was making, you know. And so that brings me to this. When I become program director, David and I set up a training session where nobody got on the air unless they were trained.
Exactly.
You know what you're doing when you get on the air.
I remember that.
And so we had on one of the weekdays, we had it right after the DB Variety Hour, Don Branch, and we would bring people in and train them, and we started focusing on training, and that's when KOPN started sounding better, you know. I mean, more tighter. People were comfortable with the board. I didn't want anybody that I had doing radio not to be prepared. I didn't want anybody to go through what I went through that first 2 hours at KOPN. You know.
Well, you know now that you mentioned that, I'll pivot to say, we all know that in radio, through training, as you said, that dead air is a programmer or host kryptonite. That's you know, the dead air is kryptonite. That's one of the first things you learn. You know, so you don't want it dead. You got to keep it moving, right? Yeah. So that was one thing that that I was trained on for sure. So I've kept that down through the years. We might have to make a sign that the programmer's kryptonite is dead air.
we had a programmer one time. I wish I could remember his name. A young man. He wasn't with us very long, but he dead air. He should have named his show Dead Air. You know? And so one day I'm listening, and all of a sudden a cart starts playing Dead Air, Dead Air, Dead Air, Dead Air, Dead Air. And he had made himself a cart. And so whenever,
that's pretty good.
yeah, it's pretty humorous, I thought. But anyway, my point is you know, man, train people.
Yes.
Train people. KOPN is never going to be a slick commercial sounding radio station. Never, ever, ever, ever. And if it ever does, I'll quit listening. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, it needs to be a little tighter.
A little tighter. Mm-hmm.
You know, as far as some of the stuff. But
you know, that's some definitely constructive criticism. I think you know, I've learned to work with it over the years. You know, because when we got electronics, if something doesn't work, I always come right in and say, hey, we're live and we can't erase nothing.
There you go.
That's usually a good phrase I use, because you know, that's when you know, if you rely on electronics so much, and now we do. You know, we got the internet, we got our phones. You know, you can plug in here, but what if the plug in doesn't work? Then what are you gonna do? So I still come to the station with my own CDs. You know, because I've of course collected over the years, and of course there's a wealth of collection here. But I always say you got to have some physical backup, and that's something that I don't know, you may have talked to artists about as well. Now that we're moving forward in this age, we come away from vinyl, but we have CDs now, and a lot of them now are going to MP3s, and because people can have it on their phone. But the artists that I talk to now, I say, hey, don't rule out your physical CDs, because there's some older generation that don't know how to do the electronics. They would love to get a CD from you, or be able to purchase the actual CD, because they don't have access to that other. So it's made them think, the ones that I've talked to. You know, and the artists are paying attention, because you know, the public is not all young. The public is a melting pot of people, and I think that's very important for them to know, even the history of KOPN with vinyl and coming into the digital age. You know,
it's just a growing process. I mean, it's like, well, the CD thing. I did want to mention this, and I was going to when we were talking about the training. Don Branch, the man, Don was blind, and we had a section of, and it may still be here, I don't know, of brailled records, and we had braille on. It may still be on the board. I don't know. We had braille on the board. Don would come in here from Paquin Towers. He'd walk here. He'd come upstairs. He'd pull his records. He would go in their room and do his show, and never had to help him do anything.
wow.
I mean, it was amazing.
Wow. Now that
Don,
history.
we first got our first CD machine. Ah, man, CDs. And we started getting CDs, and we had one little spot for CDs, you know. And so we've been playing CDs for 6 months. And I'm in there I'm in their room, and Don's doing his show. And for some reason, I said, Don, we need to get some of those CDs brailled up for you. He goes, what? I said, some of the CDs we need to get brailled up for you. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, the CDs, man. He goes, what's a CD? I said, Don, no. You know? And so I grabbed one. I said, here, Don. And he took it, and it was like, and he was like, wow. And the machine was right there. I had spaced out and didn't tell Don about the CDs, you know. And that was one thing that just, you know, it blew me away, that he didn't know about the CDs. And the look on his face, and we got him brailled up and CDs and stuff.
Right.
But the thing about Don was, you know, I mentioned that we had the training session after his show. It was so neat, man. I'd have like maybe, let's say, in particular, maybe 3 of the Taiwanese ladies that were trained. And I'd always take the trainees and have them right there in the hall before Don came out. And Don would come out, he'd take his stocking cap and pull it down to his chin. He'd take his cane, and he comes walking out of the air room, and I'd say, Don, we have some trainees here. Oh, good. If I can do it, you can do it. And it was like, you know, it just broke the ice. It was like, wow. And they realized, hey, a blind man can do this, I can do it, you know.
Absolutely.
Don was a great guy, and I really miss him, and I don't even know where he is. But he was a great addition to our radio station as a volunteer programmer. I just want to say that KOPN became part of my life.
Yes.
This staff that I was with up here became part of my family. My son did programming on KOPN. My son is now 45 years old and a professor at Lincoln University. He cut his teeth up here at KOPN.
That's beautiful.
He knew everything about how to do all the production and all that stuff. He taught other people, you know. But my point is that now, 40 some odd years later, as I mentioned before, it's sort of a soundtrack of my life. 45 years later, remember I told you about the morning that I first heard the beautiful classical music? My clock is set. That classical music comes on every morning. That's what I wake up to.
Wow.
You know, I'm 74 years old, and I still get a kick out of hearing alternative music and people having a good time and enjoying themselves on the radio. Now, sometimes you can tell that some people aren't enjoying themselves. But when you get folks like Kevin Walsh and the programming that he's done over the years, jewels. They are Lee Ruth, Joanne and I used to set our clock so we could hear Lee sing Radio Omega. Radio Omega, signing off at what, 6 in the morning, you know.
Wow.
And so all these years, from the second day I was in Columbia till the day that I die, I'll be a KOPN listener.
Wow. Well, to close it out, I'd like to hear you do your show promo, like you're just getting ready to sign on. And how would that go? Can you do that?
Don't you touch that dial. It's time for the Cedar Creek Pickaway with the Tennessee Hound Dog. Take it away, boys.
I love it.